Welcome back, everybody. We now move on to the second panel of the day, and we are looking at the interesting subject of maximising renewable energy at a local level. As the very knowledgeable audience in this room knows, that renewable energies like solar, wind, hydro, biofuels and others are at the centre of the transition to a less carbon-intensive way of working and living. Delighted to announce another fantastic panel of speakers. They include Ross McClory, Head of Business Development and Distributed Energy and Private Networks at SSE Enterprise Utilities, Mary Brooks, who is the Smart Energy Systems Director at Low Carbon Hub, Pat Jirai-Bates, who is the Group Procurement Director at Sky, Dave Sweeney, Product Manager at IES, and Chris Hewitt, the Chief Exec at Solar Energy UK. If I could, I'd just like to quickly go around the panel and ask you all to give a quick sense of the work that you do in the context of decarbonisation. So, Chris, would you like to go first, please?
So, Solar Energy UK represents the whole solar energy storage sector in the UK. We've now got nearly 300 members, which has grown since about, over the last 2 years, from about 180, so the sector is really growing rapidly. The economics now are uncontested. The government's energy strategy actually said that solar the expectation is that we would see a 5-fold increase in solar between now and 2035, in line with that decarbonisation of the entire power sector. We think that's entirely possible to do. And in terms of this panel, I think the key thing from our point of view is the decentralised generation side of the business. The on-site commercial solar is really, really growing rapidly. So we're seeing a lot of demand from all parts of the sectors. So it's all systems go for our industry.
It's exciting times. Thanks for that positive opening gambit. Mary, another positive opening gambit in relation to your work, please.
Thanks, Aid. Yes, so Low Carbon Hub is an energy business run for the benefit of the community based in Oxfordshire. We predominantly develop and operate solar installations on school and business roofs. But we're also just about to complete and energise our first ground mount solar installation, and we operate a hydro generation unit on the Thames. And that's our kind of core business model that we've been running now for 10 years. But what we're looking to, on the innovation side of things at the moment, is moving much more into smart community energy schemes. So looking from a business and also domestic household perspective at optimization behind the meter, and then how it is that we can facilitate communities, so businesses, householders, coming together and coordinating how they use, store and generate energy in order to achieve their energy goals to greater advantage.
Thanks very much, Mary. And Pat, please give us an insight into your work.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Pat Jirai and I lead Corporate Services Procurement for Sky. And as part of my role, we look after all of Sky's utilities bills. So as you can kind of understand, that's how I've ended up here looking at decarbonisation. Sky has a very ambitious target to be net carbon zero by 2030. We have always been pushing forward beyond what we've been required to do by regulation, but to try and be a force for good in the world. And we have gone from being carbon neutral to trying to now be pushing into doing more sort of on-site and off-site sort of solar and other renewable generation to try and build a lot of additionality. So that's kind of my interest in this, and very excited to be here on the panel, so thank you.
Very good. My background is in television, so I've been tracking Sky's early stage work in the sector for many years now, so delighted to have you on the panel. And Ross, could you give us some insights into your work at SSE, please?
Sure, we've obviously heard from some of my colleagues through the course of yesterday, but I work with in a consultative manner with private sector predominantly, but we work across local authority and other associations to really engage the larger energy consumers, where we can really make a difference in the carbon emissions and reducing that through not just solar or wind or battery, whatever. It's about bringing that all together under a whole system thinking approach, where we can actually really sort of establish and optimise the true value across these technologies to really sort of tackle the challenges that they face. And we're finding that where you've also then got the technologies, it's then also looking at the infrastructure that sits behind that and what it's connecting to, so that there's resilience, and that provides the confidence for these sort of large operations to sort of move forward. And then moving that forward into the smaller SMEs rather, market that can then benefit from some of the kind of quantities of scale So that's kind of what we're doing.
Very good, thanks very much. And Dave, lastly, give us an insight into your work at IAS, please.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, IAS is a software company. So traditionally we've been focused on building energy compliance modelling, but recently through a number of R&D projects we're kind of expanding out into commercial spaces now. We're looking at decarbonisation road mapping. And as part of that, I'm the product manager for the virtual network modelling tool as part of that kind of suite of tools. And what we're focused on is delivering, as it says here, on the local level. Every locality is different. The west coast of Ireland looks totally different to central London, and doing a decarbonisation roadmap that's relevant and achievable to the locality that you're looking at is very important, and that's what our software tries to achieve, is to try and show that pathway and overcoming, be it resource or infrastructural limits, and how and when you can overcome them. That's kind of what we're focused on.
Very good, thanks so much indeed. I know whole systems thinking is something that is animating the interest of a lot of you, and we'll come on to that in a sec, but I'm really interested, Chris, to pick on your point about optimism. Let's start up with a nice optimistic sense of where we are with the sector. What's your sense of why there is that energy, that optimism in the sector at the moment?
Actually, yeah, I used to say optimism. I now say confidence, because actually it's the economics are absolutely undisputed now, and obviously the energy price crisis and the spike in those prices has driven that even faster. So I imagine the likes of Pat have been trying to do what she's now doing at Sky for a number of years, and the conversations with your finance director are now an awful lot easier than they were a couple of years ago. So that's one of the drivers. The technology itself has continued to improve, innovate, become more smart, become more integrated with others, and so it's a simple technology to install, but actually there's a sophistication which goes with it as well, along with batteries and the sort of smart charging which we've got. So there's lots of options out there, I think. So it's partly the economics, partly that sort of technology improvements, and partly the climate agenda. I mean, I was at COP26 in Glasgow, seems a long time ago now already, but again, the confidence of many business sectors that the technology is there to do this and sort of decarbonisation. Some of the policy needs to catch up, but there's a real sort of ability to see where we're going to go in the next 10 years, which is really heartening.
You're nodding vigorously over there, Pat. Do you feel optimistic?
I do say this, and this is slightly controversial, is never waste a good crisis to get what you want, right? So, 30, about 3-4 years ago, when we were looking at things like off-site PPAs or doing, large solar, the sort of things, the projects that I'm talking about and we're sort of commissioning now, about 3 years ago, I was told, well, we've got a great off-grid hedge with SSE. Why it's too complicated, just leave it, let's focus on other things. And I was sort of saying this to Chris before, is this has changed, the conversation is very different now, where there is this driver from the CFOs and down, but it's also that, we also now have the impetus of both. So it is helpful to start driving that agenda, where it's not just doing the right thing and trying to decarbonise our whole estate. We really want to do that, and there's a lot of ambition across Sky. I think it's interesting that a procurement person is standing here, but you could talk to people across our business, and there's a lot of passion around decarbonisation in every aspect of our processes. So I think it is saying that I know it's not positive, and it has an impact on people, the cost of living crisis and everything else. But it has really helped us drive that forward, and if we can make it more commercialised and start to drive some of those costs down, because there's more demand, can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I mentioned yesterday that a crisis accelerates the future, so interested to hear your points there, and your sense of optimism in the sector. Do you feel that? Yeah,
it's as probably you all find, it's not happening as quickly as we'd all like it to, but it is happening. There's a number. The local area energy plan that's been developed in LHES in Scotland are a number of initiatives that are being centrally led, and they haven't happened previously. There's much more needs doing, but the fact that we're on the road would give me optimism. I just hope it happens quickly enough.
Yeah, Mary, I live in Oxford, as you know, and I see the work that your organisation is doing. It's really inspiring to see this infrastructure going in the ground. Do you feel that sense of optimism and drive in the sector at the moment?
No, it's all terrible. I'm joking. I think we kind of have to say that. If we didn't have some kind of positivity and optimistic outlook to this, we probably wouldn't be here on the panel talking about it. And there are other perspectives, and there are a lot of things that are challenges, but actually, I think confidence is a useful word, that I have a lot of confidence that the work that we're doing is making progress, and there are things that we can do that makes a real difference. So, yeah.
Do you see the investment and the funding flowing from that confidence?
Well, certainly from the perspective of our business, access to finance is not something that we have a particularly big challenge with. The challenges lie elsewhere. Not especially with the technology particularly, although there are some technology issues as we move into kind of newer, kind of smarter ways of operating assets. But actually it tends to come from just the challenges of moving from a regulatory system and ways of working and the culture around the energy sector, and how we enable ourselves and others to move from where we are now into that system that we need to have.
Yeah. And Ross, with £24 billion worth of investment flowing through the business, I'm sure you have some sense of confidence at SSE at the moment.
Yeah, I've got great confidence. We've got that sort of fund to sort of lean on. But yeah, no, we've seen a huge uplift in businesses coming forward and really sort of trying to push, obviously, the sustainability goals, and setting out what their ambitions are. And I think it's kind of varied in terms of how advanced they are in their journey. But the point being is that they're talking about, they're doing it, they're almost kind of pressurised in doing it as well through their own supply chain or customer base. So if they're a manufacturer, they've got to be seen to be delivering a net zero plan that then sort of drives all that. And it goes back to your point, Pat, it's just that it's starting to kind of gain that momentum, and it's now about and I think it's been said in other panels, but it's about the action as opposed to just talking about it now. And I think that's the challenge that we just need to, I think businesses need to get comfortable with a kind of longevity of that commitment to whether it's a PPA, long-term sort of 25-year commitment to that, but there's flexibility around that as well, to kind of appease some of those concerns. So it's really interesting sort of. Before we move on to the discussion around whole system thinking, I'd like to just add a little bit of colour to this conversation around confidence, to use the nice form of alliteration, but give us some real world examples of some projects that are coming to life to give the audience a sense of what this looks like at the local level. So we've got a number of, we focus on sort of, ports, airports, the sort of high-end manufacturing and all the rest. And what we're finding is that we have got, so you've got the sort of view where there's the on-site capability to deploy the technologies, but that comes with its own challenges based on the infrastructure that's already there, and you're kind of there with the physical asset and whether you can actually deploy or not. So you're then saying, well, we need to then look at the overall sort of scale that's actually required to make a difference to that organisation. And we've got, as I said, we've got a number of manufacturers where we're looking at off-site land, third-party land, where we can actually sort of scale up to really achieve the solar demand that's required. But we're then also starting to look at wind and battery as to complement, to then start to really achieve a higher percentage of renewable usage. Fantastic. Mary, as I say, I have some insights into what you're doing in Oxford. I live in Oxford as well. After a long walk, I took my children to see the hydroelectric Archimedes screw renewable energy on the River Thames, and after that long walk, they were almost interested in it. But give us a sense. I've met your kids. Yeah. After a few arguments with everybody, but give us a sense of some of the projects that are going in the ground in and around Oxford.
We've got a lot going on. So we're involved in a project called Project Leo. Leo's Local Energy Oxfordshire. It's actually led by Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks. And it's a partnership with the distribution network operator, ourselves, University of Oxford and Oxford Brookes, and a number of other businesses, Nuvei and EDF. And the city councils, I should not forget that, city and county councils, and through them the other district councils in Oxfordshire. And one of the really exciting things that we're working on there is a series of what we call smart and fair neighbourhood projects. So in those, we've got a whole backdrop of amazing, markets for flexibility and technology things going on, all the things that we could talk about around smart energy systems. But with these projects, what we've done is we worked with already engaged community energy groups around the county, and we just asked them what their major challenges were with respect to engagement with the energy system, and then said, right, okay, now let's look at how we could potentially bring flexible generation, storage, use of energy to try and help solve those problems. So, for example, on the Thames, we've got our hydro at Sandford Lock. There's also one at Osney, which is right in the middle of Oxford. And that hydro is installed in a weir next to an island that's on a secondary substation. So it's a very neat little bit of the energy system that's packaged up for us. And we've been working to help residents put combined battery and PV installations into their homes. We're putting a community battery system into the already community-owned hydro system that's there, and we're then putting in a smart platform that accesses the data from those, obviously with due permissions and anonymisation, and also picks up data from the monitoring of the local voltage network that's on that secondary substation, so that we can begin to look not just at how each of those individual, there's a couple of businesses and the households can optimise their own energy use behind their own meter, but to say actually if as a community your goal was to reduce costs and maybe kind of hive that off and put it into the community pot for your projects, how could we coordinate things between you? Or if it's that you would like to kind of see if collectively you can reduce your carbon as a community in a greater way by optimising across those different households and businesses, how can we do that? How do we optimise the use of the power that's coming from the hydro and make sure that we've got that hyper-local balancing? So yeah, very exciting stuff. Yeah. That's just one of them.
I thought I'd just give a little bit of a name check to our work on the EV Summit, our sister project. The Project Leo that Mary referenced there came about as a result of a collaboration between partners who first met at the EV Summit. So this forum has led to a real-world £30 million project that flowed from the meetings and the partnerships that hopefully will happen in this room today as well. Pat, give us a sense of some of the colour, some of the things going on in the world at Sky, please.
So we, it may be in the news, so we are building, have built, will be opening a large studio lot in Elstree. That will be Sky Studios Elstree. So we are set to be opening very soon. And we'll have our first productions coming on site very soon as well. As part of planning and as part of our general sort of the ethos around Sky Zero, we were looking to maximise our ability for on-site generation, and we're in the process of, we will hopefully very soon be ready to start implementing a roof-mounted solar project with SSE, which will be great. We hope, once all of that gets in, it's a very interesting project because it's such a brand new site. So we don't know a lot about usage. We don't know a lot about how and how whether we're going to have the peaks and troughs or whether we're going to have a very static usage. It's a very different sort of building for us. And I think having some of that flexibility around having the roof mount solar, but then to go for further phases. Do we want to be looking at things like battery storage? Do we want to be looking at further maximisation on other sites? So it's a very interesting project of work, and yeah, it's one I'm really proud of. I think it's supposed to be, based on our calculations, it should be covering 50% of our usage on site based on our projections, which is huge.
So you seem to be suggesting there's an element of an experimental approach to that. Is that the case? And if
I think you can get very bogged down. And a building exists, and you know what the usage of that building is. You can sort of design something that is definitely, absolutely, you're sure you're going to be able to manage the peaks and troughs. What we have here is a brand new building, a brand new site, where we just don't know. So we have to build something that is flexible enough to give us that energy. Based upon the generation over the year, it will generate something. But how we manage it, if say we overgenerate, say we aren't using the site on dates that it's closed, what do we do with the energy? How do we flow back to the grid? How do we spill? How do we, all of those questions. We're building in flexibility in that so that we're not shutting any doors to any expansion or extensions of that. But we're not letting us not knowing stop us doing the project, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
I know there's boardroom interest and involvement in sustainability at Sky. So with that sense of experimentation and perhaps risk, is that something that is supported by senior management at Sky?
Absolutely, because this is so core to our business. Sky Zero is core to our business. It is, we were the media partner for COP26 as well, so there was quite a lot of large Sky contingent there last year. It was last year, yes. And so for us, it's not just this. We're looking at what we can do as Sky. We've got a huge energy usage as well, which I think we're not just a television company, we're also the second largest home broadband provider in the UK. That's a huge amount of energy. The amount of data, every time you stream a film on Sky Cinema, there is data that is being generated. That's got a huge carbon footprint and a huge energy usage. So we've got to look at we have a very variable usage across our different sites. It's how do we, I think it's an interesting one about different areas and different locations and how we partner, but one size won't fit all, even on different buildings. Even in the same building, in different buildings on the same site, we're seeing very different usage. So we've got a lot of openness to trying different things. At the end of the day, let's see what sticks. And if it changes, as long as we have the flexibility in a contract to change and move, that helps us. So there's a lot of positivity about it.
Yeah, I think something else which probably plays into this, I don't know if it does in your case, but does in many others, is the sort of the general trend towards electrification across heat and transport. So you can sort of, you know that your electricity demand is likely to be going up. You know more people can have electric vehicles. The opportunity to charge that with your own renewables is going to be an attractive proposition to employees potentially. So I think that's playing into on-site generation being bigger, even more of a certain bet that it was even a few years ago.
Yeah, very good. Dave, give us a sense of some real on-the-ground examples going on in your world, please.
Yeah, so probably the most tangible example we have is a decarbonisation roadmap we did for Limerick, which is a city on the west coast of Ireland. Now, not at the same scale as Manchester, but it's a city by our standards. And what we've basically created is a roadmap for the city council to follow to decarbonise based on their own projections or targets from a carbon emission reduction standpoint. So we basically are able to tell them, listen, in 5 years' time, we want to be hitting this amount of EVs to accommodate this whatever percentage of the transport has been reduced. By the next stage, you want to be 100% public transport as being electrified. At this stage, then you want to have a certain amount of the roof cover with PV installed. You want to electrify the things like heat, the heat of different public buildings, retrofitting to make sure the heat pumps are actually viable in those situations, because they're all quite old buildings. And what that does is it makes it more achievable, because if you look at a city, even a city as small as Limerick, you still don't want to say, well, listen, you've got to do all of this stuff at once or you're screwed, basically. You don't say that. You say, listen, well, all you have to do is put in 10% of this solar by this stage, another 20%, another 30%, another 40%. And it just breaks it down, it just makes it much more achievable. It means that everybody can kind of then scale up. So you've got grid capacity to worry about, for example. So the DNO in Ireland is able to accommodate whatever level of PV is installed at that time, so they don't have to upgrade all the substations at once, because they've got resource issues and economic issues like everybody else, or constraints. So it's just a matter of working within those constraints and trying to figure out the best path through that. Is what our decarbonisation roadmap kind of does. Other examples then, like I mentioned earlier, you need to have bespoke solutions. So on a slightly different scale to what Pat is talking about in terms of every building is different, every locality is different. So we've done some work in terms of simulating the energy consumption of an island off the coast, the west coast of Ireland, which is very, very rural and very remote. Inishmore is what it's called. If anybody would like to go for a visit, they'd kill me if I didn't promote it. But there's a local energy co-op there called the Aran Islands Energy Co-op, and their goal is basically to become energy independent. And as part of that, the best way of doing that, and easiest way of doing that, is to decarbonise and introduce as much local renewable technology as possible. So much like Manchester and Limerick has a lot of roof space, as you might imagine, there's not a lot of roof space, but there is space for, say, a wind turbine. So that's the sort of thing you can look at there. And the main way of getting tourists over and back across the island, and most people across the island, is by ferry. So you have to think about things like green hydrogen as well, and decarbonising transport, not only road transport, but nautical transport, I suppose. And that's the thing that we're kind of focused on, is making sure that each solution works for the place that you're studying. And because it isn't, as Pat said and as Chris said, it's not one size fits all. Not one size fits all. It just can't be. Yeah.
So it's super interesting to hear these real world on the ground examples. Let's move from the practical up to the slightly more abstract. I know you're all interested in that whole systems thinking approach. Who would like to first give an example of what that means and what that means to you and what you're doing in your work? Pat, would you like to open up on that?
I think if we all think about our businesses, so if I think about it, I've got Sky, I've got a large business which has a very energy hungry business. but I need to understand what is happening and why, what I'm using, where I'm using it, how I'm using it, and what's going on, and what is driving my energy growth. Because, and it's such a cliche, the cheapest kilowatt hour of energy is the one you don't use. So, nobody laughed at my joke, okay. Anyway, thank you for the pity laugh. So it is fundamental to things like what can we do from behind and in front of the meter to make sure that we are absolutely being as efficient as possible with the energy that we're consuming. And then once you have a really good picture of how you're using that energy, making sure that you've got the right sort of solution in place with the best sort of renewable available to meet those energy needs. Because I will not be thanked by our business if we do not have the energy needed to drive the data center that allows you to download your Sky Cinema, you know, newest film. I don't know what the newest film is, but anyway. So that is, if simplistically, that's how I see it. And I think that we need to look at it from all the way through, rather than just saying, okay, I know I have an energy need, I know I have a building that seems to have a lot of energy uses 24 hours a day, so I'm going to throw everything at it and see what sticks. That's not really thinking about it holistically, and then layering on different renewable solutions, because solar is great, but it only works when the sun is shining. So what happens when the sun isn't shining? Where are we going to be driving energy from? Is it a battery solution? And then if we don't go to a battery solution, what then covers that burst and overflow? So it's just kind of getting yourself into a situation where you're layered on. And that's kind of how I see it.
Very good. Anyone else like to contribute on that? Mary?
Yeah, I'll come in. I think it's a really good example of that layering of how things develop. And there's an example I'd like to give is we heard from Richard Harrington from Go Ahead Group earlier on. And Oxford Bus Company is part of the Go Ahead Group, and they happen to be the first solar rooftop installation that we implemented at the Low Carbon Hub. And the story behind that was really that there's a very strong collaborative environment in and around Oxford and across the county with respect to decarbonisation. It has been for more than a decade. And at the bus company, they decided that they wanted to do something that would give them greater certainty and resilience on their energy costs and supply. But they also recognised that installations of solar wasn't really their expertise, it's not their core business. And so we worked with them on a community invested model for putting those solar panels in place. And so we have agreement on selling the energy as generated to them when they use it, and then obviously it's quite an old installation now. We're getting income from feed-in tariffs and export as well, and that's kind of like, you know, one of the first things that that they've done. And in some ways, from a whole systems approach, they could have gone with another rent a roof type scheme. There was plenty of them at the time, but they chose to go with an organisation that is required. Kind of legally within our articles, all of our surplus goes back into either reinvesting in the business and more renewables, or it goes into our innovation projects, which are about accelerating decarbonisation within the county. So again, there's a benefit there that they've taken by the choice that they made with going with us, which we're very grateful for, and it was our first project. Since then, they've also been involved in Project Leo, which I mentioned, in that at the early days of that, we were in the process of specifying and procuring a battery to go into one of our rooftop PV sites to investigate optimization, but we really wanted to crack on early with the process of setting up systems for automated control of battery systems. They happened to have a battery, and they let us play with that. You know, there was no skin off their nose. It didn't make any difference to what they were doing in terms of their operations, but they were willing to say, actually, if you'd like to hook up your systems to that, you can get going with that, so we could get the learning out of that early. So it was part of being, you know, part of that innovation world locally in order that we could accelerate the learning as well. So, you know, it's just another example there. And I think maybe to finish it off, this isn't an Oxford Bus Company one, although we will give them the sales pitch, no doubt. We have, on that kind of community benefit innovation side of our business, been developing services to support SMEs improve the fabric of their buildings so that, like, you know, kilowatt hour not used. And actually what we're looking at now is combining that with the renewable technology approach and the fact that we're getting electrification of things like heat. So there's much more readiness and willingness to engage with the fact that heat pumps might be going in. And at that point, you want to size your heat pumps for the building. So you want to get the fabric right so that you're not oversizing, but you can also optimize how those heat pumps are controlled and work within, you know, the requirements of the business, but to match up with your solar or to match up with batteries. And that's the kind of thing that we're now moving on to. So it really is layers of things and moving from things that are quite simple into just building up the pieces and expanding out the opportunity that any business has to actually have quite a wide impact.
Ross, what's your take on this?
Well, we've an working example that we are looking at in a kind of cluster environment where it includes an airport, multiple kind of industrial commercial offtake end users, but also integrates the plans of the local authority in terms of bringing new jobs and new companies into the area to support the growth of the sort of airport as that transitions in its own journey, but also the manufacturing and the jobs in that particular area. And what we're looking at is supporting the infrastructure, and first and foremost, so that the aged assets and the individual private networks, or bringing in new infrastructure to support those new businesses coming in, but looking at it from a sustainable future-proofing perspective that makes it more attractive for businesses to come in because they know they've got the resilience there, but then also then coupling it with solar, looking at heat and solutions for heat requirements, and really sort of start to knit it all together, and that's where the sort of value add really takes place through that whole system thinking, because you're thinking about all aspects of the needs of those organisations to make it really attractive to come and invest in that area. But the local authorities will benefit through obviously sort of attracting new jobs, housing, economy and all that sort of good stuff. So it's really that bringing together of those multiple aspects, but each requirement for those individual businesses will be unique in its own right, but the principles are kind of the same. And it's kind of working with the kind of digital mapping and understanding what does that then look like. And to your point, where it's new build, where you don't really know what the consumption is, it's taking that calculated sort of risk in terms of and a bit of oversizing based on knowing that power demand will increase. So you're actually future-proofing the sort of the bringing in the EV. It's something else we bring into that sort of that area as well. So this cluster, that we're looking at is really exciting, but it's got multi-layers, multi-stakeholders, you can imagine, and that's where the collaboration piece, and it's starting to take shape, and it's been on the go for quite some time. So we're hopefully getting to the end stages of it.
Thanks. Time is pushing on, so I'd like to move on to some questions from the audience now. So who would like to ask the first question? Someone on this side of the audience. Can you state your name, where you're from, and who you'd like to direct the question to, please?
Sure. My name's Jez Tweed. I work for Trafford Council. It's basically just an open question to everyone. Is that we get a number of sort of planning applications coming in from new developments, and they always look at just single air source heat pumps and individual house solution for every house. And then if we're talking about some kind of distributed energy system, is there an appetite for developers to really go for that? Because I very rarely see that coming through in new developments we're looking at.
Who would like to answer that, Mary?
I could pick a bit up on that. I used to work at Oxford City Council, so I have a little bit of perspective on the local authority side of things. But also, one of our other Smart and Fair Neighbourhood projects is looking at a recently constructed new build project that has put measures in on a house-by-house basis, has a bit of a challenge in that it can't put the kind of final set of PV installations in that it wanted to due to the way the connection's been implemented. And so we've been trying to look at smart solutions to help with that. And I think that there is appetite from developers. It's probably still a bit niche. I mean, I can give a massive kind of thumbs up to Greencore, who are behind that particular site and are very ambitious on all of their developments being net zero. And in that particular case, actually, their ambition for the site is that it will net export energy into the grid. So there is some appetite there. I think the fact that the planning system, the big capital P, isn't joined up with energy planning is one of the biggest challenges we've got in the energy systems transition, and yeah, that will not be a surprise to you that I'm saying that. And it's something that I think we've got an Ofgem consultation that's either just about to finish or has just finished that's looking at those kind of governance systems, and I think that's going to be really, really important for our success in it. And then I guess the other thing I'd say is that from a governance perspective, it's about getting the connection. So if you're a developer of you know, a residential or, you know, whatever it is, mixed use site, and you're going for that connection into the grid. At the moment, the regulatory process, for very good reasons, prevents the distribution network operators from really being able to take into account any of those smart systems unless they are quite heavy duty and one-off examples, so where you've got automated network management. And that has happened, and there are things that are kind of referred to as flexible connections or dynamic connections that have happened, but it's very isolated cases. And I think what we, as well as kind of looking at the planning system and the energy planning system, we really need to get a place where we can create the environment for regulated connections teams to be able to carry on their job now and do it really well and, you know, safely into the standards and kind of value for money expectations that we have, but also allow those people with that expertise of doing connections to help us work out how they get from that version of connections to the future version of connections, where they're allowed to say, actually, you can get a connection and you can have more renewables in there because we know that you've got the systems in place to manage and balance that. And it's turning the system on its head, not just in terms of kind of more focus on the grid edge where we're actually using energy, but it's turning the system on its head in terms of how we treat people who use energy. So right now, domestic customers are treated very, very passively within the system, and there's rights to that kind of security of supply. That's absolutely what most people want, and that won't change. But if we were to assume that they could be more active, we might come up with a different set of processes and systems that would enable things to happen in a, you know, to maximise the benefits of the technology that's right under our noses, basically.
Can I just add on that point, as well as the planning system, I think the other driver here is building regulations, and there's sort of good news and bad news there. I think that the good news is that the Part L changes. What we're hearing from the mass house builders is that they are expecting that most English homes will be requiring solar because of the changes, because of the way the economics work. The next iteration, sort of future home standards 2025, is still up for grabs, and I think we really need to move towards PV, EV charging and heat pump as kind of the standard sort of for any new build in 2025, and that's yet to be decided. But I think it's the mass house builders will actually wait to be dragged up by regulation. That's always what we've learned.
Very good. Pat, you give me the best visual cues with positive nodding. Would you like to respond to this question?
I disagree with it, but I think particularly for this audience is thinking about your whole system. So coming back to that is my whole system may be very different from a local authority's whole system, and it's thinking about the decarbonisation of the whole system. And if we can take that away and think about all the different panels and all the different talks we've had these last 2 days, is actually these are all aspects of a system that, and that local authorities and city authorities actually have a huge amount of power here to really drive UK forward. That businesses we're going to do our best to create some of that commercialised demand, but I can't fix a local authority problem, I can't fix planning, we can't fix these things, but we will help and want to drive that forward. And I think that's part of that. It's systematic thinking.
It's so true, and this whole systems thinking is absolutely critical when you're talking about collaboration, which came up this morning, and I think like in our kind of chat before the panel we were all saying is really important as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. You can't necessarily solve someone else's problem for them, but you can be part of them solving it. I mean, another critical thing, actually, again, thinking about connections into the grid. One of the challenges there is getting power systems engineers doing that job, and there aren't enough of them, and they've got regulatory timelines for how fast they have to turn everything around. So there's no room for 20% time in that role. But if we could, even just create one little kind of part of the network where we were able to inject the money to get the right people in with a bit more spare time for thinking about it, but have them doing the job and informing the transition, that's the kind of place where we could get involved in it and local authorities could get involved in it, and it actually helps, SSEN in our case solve that problem. I think it must be one that's shared by all of the DNOs.
Very good. I'm keen to open up the floor to some more questions as we're coming down to the last 5 or so minutes. Any more questions? Someone at the back of the audience there?
I'm Lydia Merrill from Greater Manchester Environmental Education Network. I've been listening to you talking about whole systems thinking, but you haven't mentioned HR and the workforce flow and upskilling and reskilling and retention. And I'm just wondering if you can give us an example of how you're going about that kind of plan and integrating it. And I'm thinking about reaching back into schools and all the transitions between primary and secondary and post-16. How do you, and retraining your adult workforce?
Who would like to come on that,
I'll
Chris?
come in a little bit. It's absolutely an issue. So you mentioned the power systems, the DNOs are struggling to recruit. Our industry is struggling to recruit. I know the wind industry is struggling to recruit. There is definitely a short-term skills gap. The technology and the investment is starting to run ahead of the capacity of the labour force to deal with that. I think there'll be short-term capacity constraints there, and that's just something we'll have to handle. I think the long-term answer is exactly what you're saying, is have those conversations with the colleges, with the university system, with the tertiary education system, with the school system. I think we really do need to start to advertise the career prospects of all of this sector to a much wider audience. It feels too niche. It's going to be the main part of the energy system before we know it, and we absolutely need to train more people in the skills that are required.
On the Mayor's panel yesterday, the positive idea of looking beyond degrees to more vocational training courses. There were some really interesting developments in that space.
We're actually working in partnership with the Mayor of London on a sort of southeast-based thing, which is exactly sort of trying to sort of support apprenticeships and drive sort of more training in the industry as well.
SSE are doing some work on this, sorry, about equity and something, I don't know the details, I'm so sorry, they did tell me, I'm going to get in trouble now, sorry, but they did touch on this briefly, that SSE are doing some work on how they're cross-training people from. But do you know more about that? I'm sorry putting on
I guess it's the employee up here.
No, it's really because we had the meeting and talked about it.
Yeah, no, we're doing a lot within sort of bringing in many more sort of graduates and apprentices in terms of that vocational piece, and I think that it is key to get that message sort of through the through the various layers of kind of educational, but starting at grassroots and even sort of within primary schools, getting that message. I think they're becoming much more involved with the sort of sustainability message, in terms of just that educational piece, and that then feeds all the way through into sort of college or apprenticeships or whatever. And as I say, I think that even the drivers within businesses, you're seeing many more roles that are all sustainability or environmental sort of and the like. So. That in itself is starting to sort of promote, obviously, the challenge that's out there. But you're absolutely right that there needs to be more sort of messaging to the engagement of the sort of younger generation that bring it in, because as you say, that this is the norm, this is the new norm, this is how it's going to be moving forward.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more you could say, but a final question from someone in the audience. Any more questions? Anyone wants to put their hand up to ask a final question? If not, I'll go over to the online. That Bean, I think, in the front of the audience there.
I'll just shout. On the education piece, we recognise this somewhere ago in our industry. We've created some lesson blocks that drop straight into the national curriculum. We'd love to get some traction. So anybody who's interested in dropping those, and they start at primary level, because we have to catch them. And the children that I speak to when I go to speak to sixth graders, they're all over it. They think it's fantastic. But we've got to get them early and persuade them that being on the tools, or actually it doesn't matter what they want, if they want to be an accountant or a lawyer or whatever it is, there is a role in low carbon for them. It doesn't matter, but clearly we want more people on the tools.
Yeah.
And we want to reassure them that in the UK, it's no longer a dirty word to be on the tools, because we've had 50 years where we've downgraded people who work with their hands. And that has got to stop, because we need more people who can actually put this stuff into practice.
And just to pick up, because I'm not sure if the live stream will have got that without the mic, but what you were saying there was about kind of drop-in kind of packages for the national curriculum and from primary level up, which I think echoes a lot of the points that's been made here. In the question, there was something about kind of retraining and not just looking at younger people, and I think that's really important, because there's kind of an assumption that the workplace is changing and that's about young people. Actually, everybody's attitudes to work are changing, and so there's jobs and there's an environment that we can create that's absolutely, it's really important. But it goes into the education system, but it's much, much wider. It's everybody that's involved in this.
Continuous education, which is, I think I was trying to give you, was I think SSE are doing some work on training their existing workforce out of those sort of dirty technologies into the green, which is an investment that businesses have to make. But we are seeing a talent crunch across the piece. We have to be investing in our people, continuous education through people's careers.
Yeah, some other encouraging news. The new GCSE in natural history is going on stream, coming live next year, isn't it? So that hopefully will engage more young people around this super important subject. Well, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for those great questions, and thank you to our panel for the great answers and the creative interchange, and indeed for the whole system thinking love-in, which I think we all enjoyed. So thanks very much indeed for that. We will now break for another 45 minutes of all-important networking, where another £30 million collaborative project will hopefully flow, and we will look forward to seeing you for the next panel discussion. But thanks once again to our fantastic panel, and see you later.